presentation.
Yep.
Slide up.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
Oops, host has disabled share screen. There we go.
There you go. So we're live now.
So hello to those that are in the room now. Welcome to Making It in Moreland.
Hello.
We do have a number of people still yet to log in, so we'll give it a few more minutes. So we're just waiting a few more minutes for some more of our booked attendees to arrive. We don't want them missing out on the first little bit of the presentation, but we won't be waiting for too much longer. So settle in, make yourself sort of comfortable, have a bit of a look around, see where the Q&A panel is and where the chat session is. We'll be asking you to write all of your questions in that Q&A section so that we can address those at the end of the presentation. And any other sort of chat or conversation that you want to have amongst yourselves, feel free to do that in the chat section as well. This is where Zoom really does need a music feature.
It does.
Some, pre-show music. Yeah.
Yeah, background recording of an audience entering an auditorium.
Oh, that's right. Great idea.
Murmur, murmur, murmur.
I reckon we could
That would be lovely.
Yeah, I reckon we could probably work that out. Shuffling, talking to each other, the sound of bodies in the same room together.
That's right.
Foreign sound.
What a lovely, lovely thing. I'll give it maybe one more minute and then we'll get started. And anyone else that arrives can obviously can then join us at their leisure. Thanks, Tamara. Yes, that's a good idea. We could turn our music on from our computers. And hi, Ange. No, Ange. We might get started. So, hello and welcome to Making Art Public in Moreland. And this is the 7th in our Making It in Moreland in Lockdown series for 2020, presented by Arts Moreland. I'm Angela Panic and I'm the Arts Officer here at Moreland City Council. And before we begin, I'd like to firstly take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners, the custodians on this land of which we all meet today in our various locations around Australia, and I believe also around the globe today. I'm currently on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to other First Nations people who are here with us today from other parts of the world as well as Australia. I acknowledge and deeply respect your cultural heritage, your beliefs and continuing relationship with the land, and acknowledge that Aboriginal sovereignty was never ceded. So welcome. Making It in Moreland is a series of free professional development opportunities for local artists and creatives, facilitated by experts. These weekly events have focused on ways artists and creatives and makers can survive, adapt and recover from the impact of COVID-19. Today we begin part 3, Recovery, which includes a series of 2 Moreland-specific workshops looking at arts practices sort of, well, theoretically after COVID-19, but given the current circumstances and the new increased restrictions, that might be a little bit longer, but let's cross our fingers and hope that people are staying safe and that we can sort of look to the future a little bit more. So today's session is What is Public Art in Moreland? And then next week we have the final of our Making It in Moreland series, which is setting up an art space in Moreland. I'd now like to hand you over to our Moreland Public Art Officer, Emily Cormack, and Moreland RenuWall Program Officer, Leon van der Graaf. Emily is Moreland City Council's part-time public arts officer and has been curating professionally since 2001, working with contemporary art and artists in a range of galleries, museums and public spaces. She has curated exhibitions in Malaysia, Italy, Korea, New Zealand and Singapore, as well as curating and project managing over 50 exhibitions in Australia, including From Will to Form, the 2018 Tarawara Biennial, and Primavera 2016, Museum of Contemporary Art, Sydney. Prior to this, she was curator at Melbourne's leading contemporary art space, Gertrude Contemporary, in Melbourne, as well as curator of the Adam Art Gallery in Wellington, and co-founder and co-director of Chronicle ARI in Melbourne. In 2005, Emily managed the New Zealand Pavilion at the Venice Biennial, can you see that word, Biennial, and in 2003, she undertook a curatorial internship at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Emily holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Elam, which, correct me if I've pronounced that wrong,
That's right.
School of Fine Arts in Auckland, New Zealand, and an MA in Art Curatorship from the University of Melbourne, and is actually currently, I don't know how she fits it in, a PhD candidate at Monash University in Melbourne. Alongside her curatorial work, she is also a curatorial consultant on art strategy and public art commissions for private, government and corporate clients. I really don't know where you find the time to do all of this. And frequently writes for artist catalogues and periodicals, including Frieze in the UK, Art Asia Pacific in New York City, Art and Australia and Kaleidoscope magazines. She has also authored and edited a number of books and exhibition catalogues as well. So Emily will speak to you very shortly. And following Emily, we have Leon, who is our RenuWall Program Officer. Leon is a sculptor, installation and video artist, and an arts technician. He has served on numerous advisory committees and selection panels for artist-run organisations, universities and government institutions. He is currently the Moreland City Council Public Art Officer for the RenuWall program and lead installer for the Curators Gallery in Brunswick. So I want to thank both my colleagues, Emily and Leon, for taking the time out of their, which is incredibly busy schedules, to actually speak today. So I'd like to hand it over to you. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Ange. Sorry about all that. Probably could have shortened that bio.
No,
so hello everybody. Hello everybody. Thank you for tuning in today on this grey day. Hopefully we can inform and educate you in some way, and look forward to having a bit more of a, you know, relaxed Q&A session at the end. Today with my talk, I'm going to be talking a bit about capturing, you know, public art as a capturing of community forces, which is how I have worked out how to approach public art and what public art is. So in this talk, I'm just going to be going through the kind of a little brief overview of the history of public art as I see it, and some of the recent evolutions, and then how public art in council is phrased, how we talk about that, and some projects we've got going on, and also at the end I'm going to do a bit of a practical case study on, you know, what the commissioning of an artwork involves from both a consultant's perspective and from an artist's perspective. Some more kind of nuts and bolts stuff towards the end of my talk. So the history bit, I'm going to have to be a bit brief, but it's very interesting. So I'm sorry if I go a bit over time. So, first of all, sorry, help if I can get my PowerPoint going. What is public art? You know, so how does public art work? What are the different kinds of public art that we have? There's, you know, permanent public art. Whoops, sorry, I need that too. Permanent public art that's intended to last for 25 years. There's temporary, which is usually part of a public-facing exhibition or event. The mural, which has an average 5-year lifespan and it's responsive to a community context of that moment, usually. There's embedded or architecture and open spaces art, so examples include building facades, footpath treatments, and urban furniture. Site responsive work, so it responds to a specific context and is often temporary. Or else there's performance or sound-based public art, so these are activations of public space through our bodies or through sound. You know, all of these can come together in different ways to capture the forces of community and our context that we live in. So just thinking about, you know, what is public art and where did it come from? What was the first public art? And, you know, why does it exist? So the history of public art, it's important to think about, is the history of expressing the forces of control that exist over public spaces. So, you know, what is the dominant force that is in control or is policing a public domain or space? So, you know, I was just trying to think about what the earliest examples of this are. And, you know, in the Roman era, the authorities, they erected mass-produced statues of Roman emperors and put them on all of the corners of all of the streets across their empire in order to demonstrate the majesty of Rome. You know, there was lots of examples where either the church were funding, you know, public sculptures to reinforce particular ideologies, or else there were political leaders with rhetoric and ideology that they wished the public to become aware of. So in some ways it was educational, and in some ways it was propaganda. Obviously, the Russian, the socialist realism art movement in Russia was a very they kind of mastered the art of trying to glorify the achievements of the communist regime through posters and sculptures and this sort of, you know, presenting a very grandiose idea of their achievements as a way of communicating with the public directly through the visual format. So there's this acknowledgement of it as a political tool. Which I think is quite an interesting thing to consider, particularly in our current context. So, you know, it's a diplomatic or a political tool. You know, the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty are both public artworks. You know, the Statue of Liberty is very interesting because, you know, it was a gift from France to New York, and it was an expression of solidarity, recognizing how the USA's was emphasizing liberty or freedom and they had a shared value system that they wanted to acknowledge and kind of congratulate them on. Obviously, it's come to mean something very different now. And, you know, in the 20th century, the symbolism of public art has become particularly marked. You know, contemporary public art as it is now, which is more of a bipartisan expression that's tied in with, you know, contemporary art movements, is something that's very recent. In the past, it was very religious, religiously motivated or politically motivated. And so thinking about how that broke down, how that direct line of authority broke down, and it's part of a move toward the democratization of art and the institutions that house them. And, you know, public art played a part in increasing the interest and providing the public with access to contemporary art. So contemporary public art could be seen as part of broader movements in art and society, like new museology or post-structuralism, whereby the fixed authorial voices were cast into question. So instead of the public, you know, being spoken to by the dictator or by the author and just listening to that, they wanted to understand the alternative histories and how that meaning is constructed, how power is built and established in a way that reflects multiple viewpoints of a community. So it's also interesting at this time when public art is acknowledging its role within the construction of meaning and of power, it's also, you know, public monuments began to attract an increasing amount of anger and force against them at the same time. So it was sort of, there was a general understanding of the way that these monuments were an upswelling or a gathering of particularly potent forces. And it seems to me testament to public art's kind of importance, its capacity to hold these deep wells of political and social resonance within them. And I've just put the example up of you know, the Buddhas of Bamyan, which were these extraordinary 6th century monumental statues in Afghanistan, you know, that had obviously been there for thousands and thousands of years. And then the Taliban destroyed them in 2001 because they were considered idols. So, you know, the fact that this totalitarian government, you know, went to such extent to destroy what is essentially, you know, public art, as well as obviously holding great religious significance, is to me testament to the power of, you know, how the public interface with these kind of public sculptures. Other examples of this kind of, you know, of this kind of political implications of public art are in Saddam Hussein's statue, which, you know, we all saw getting destroyed on television. So that was a statue that had just been erected in 2002, and then for his 65th birthday. And then a year later, in 2003, a group of Iraqi civilians began to attack the statue. And then the United States Marine Corps decided that this would also be something they'd like to be involved in. And so they contacted foreign journalists, teed up all of the media team, got their armored vehicle, and then, you know, pulled down the statue live on TV. So that was this theater of war. So, you know, that's a really interesting, that was a really interesting event. This television, this kind of, it became a spectacle. The destruction of this work became a spectacle. Likewise, more recently, obviously, the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. So he was a famous slave trader, infamous slave trader, who made his fortune through human suffering. So between, just for, I mean, we've all read the articles, but just as a recap, between 1672 and 1689, his ships are believed to have transported 80,000 men, women, and children from Africa to the Americas. And they would stop at Bristol on the way. And so, you know, but when he died, he bequeathed all of his money to charities, and, you know, his legacy is on the Bristol streets, and memorials and buildings and concert halls are all named after him. So his statue, which was on Colston Avenue in the middle of the city, you know, with the Black Lives Matter protests globally, it became a focus of people's discontent. And, you know, council had been negotiating for quite some time to try and rewrite that plaque that accompanied that, to more accurately represent his, you know, his role within the terrible history of slavery in Bristol. But ultimately, the local sort of advocacy group for Colston had prohibited them changing the plaque, which is where it became a kind of groundswell of anger. And so, you know, they attacked it and threw it through the sculpture in the river, so in the harbour. So now his statue is, you know, lying in the bottom of the sea. And this, I mean, just as an aside, this to me is the ultimate public art. It's this gesture of overthrow. It's a coming together of the public interface and the people in what can be seen to me as a kind of social sculpture. So, you know, I feel like there's some really interesting things that are happening, and really dynamic things that are happening in people's interface with public sculpture and with public art at the moment. And so these are things that, you know, we need to think about. And we need to think about what public are we addressing? What are the forces that are currently gathering in our monuments, in our public interfacing artworks? So how do we negotiate those forces? Whose public is it? Who gets to decide, you know, gets to decide which public we're going to be talking about when we're commissioning public artworks. It's a really contested site. And we can talk a lot about this in the discussion if we want to, but it is a very interesting field to be working in, simply because, particularly in a post-colonial setting where we're trying to decolonize our public spaces. So, you know, bringing all of these forces in a self-reflexive way, but also in a way which, you know, can enliven and, you know, and celebrate our everyday experience within public space as well, which is something I strongly believe that public art can and should do. So how does council approach this hotbed of discontent? You know, we're a council, we're a local government representative of many voices. And so I'll just talk a little bit about some of the works in our public art collection and, you know, some of the ways that we approach the ideas of public and capture these within our commissioning processes. So we try and reflect the activity of our community and hand it back to the public in some ways. So some of the kind of key and very simple ways that we do this is we try and draw on local artists. So we try and use local artists as much as we can, and particularly those that represent the diversity of Moreland. We follow policies that preclude inclusiveness and diversity. So these are built into our foundation. We have a public art strategy and guideline, not strategy, we have guidelines that we work to that tie into a broader arts and culture strategy that, you know, has been developed through extensive community consultation. You know, we're constantly trying to get feedback from the public. It's a cyclical process. We're trying to build everyone's voices into this framework. So, you know, our strategy as it is now, it's available, well, it's guidelines, it's available on our website. And I'll just read some of the ways that we've framed public art on our website. So public art creates opportunities for members of the public to encounter art within their community. It can inspire, it can surprise, challenge, stimulate the public, opening up the possibilities for new connections and surprising encounters within our civic environment. It can create a sense of identity and give voice to local communities. Public art is for everyone, and it can start lively debates and feed into the texture of a community. So public art can also be a reflection of our community at a particular moment in time. So it's a temporal experience, and it offers exciting new opportunities for us to understand who we are and what's important to us. Our public art program in Moreland is built around the remarkable cultural diversity and the depth of creative talent that live and work in our community. And the key principles that we work towards when commissioning are, I'm just going to read out a few things that guide our decision-making process when we are commissioning new works or in the process of thinking through commissions. These are works that stimulate creativity, expression, and innovation by artists and communities. They stimulate healthy debate, have artistic integrity, increase community awareness and appreciation of art. They recognise, acknowledge, and celebrate Moreland's distinct Indigenous culture and its connection to the land. Interpret and celebrate the area's unique heritage and identity. Celebrate local community, cultural or geographic diversity. Provide an artistic and cultural outlet through which communities can develop their sense of place. Provide landmarks, local icons that engender a sense of pride and identity. Promote cultural expression that is original, relevant, and of significance to the artists and the arts practice within the municipality. So once we've commissioned a work, it then becomes part of our Moreland Public Art Collection. So this collection has over 60 objects, and it's been developed over the past 50 years. So, you know, here's some examples of a few of the works. Carla Gotkin's work in Glenroy, there's Simon Perry, Rolling Path, and the L. Stark mural in Coburg. Many of you have probably seen these works, but these are council commissions. I just thought I'd talk about one specific work that I feel feeds into these principles quite beautifully. This work is by Simon Perry, sorry. Simon Perry. So it's this, I was thinking about public art as historicising community identity. So this work is commemorative of Brunswick's legacy as a centre for sort of communism, free speech and activism for sort of working class roots. It draws on Moreland's, industrial heritage and also the community that was really flourishing here because of all of the brickworks and the kind of working class community that was here, and how it became a real hotbed of kind of activist, communist, or social activism in the city of Moreland. So this work commemorates Noel Coonahan, who is also the namesake of our council gallery that we've got. So he was an Australian social realist painter, and he died in '86. But he was a printmaker, a cartoonist, an illustrator, and mostly active during the 40s and 50s in Melbourne. He was a stated atheist, a communist, and an art activist. And he created art in response to the politics and social hardships of his times. So during the Great Depression, Coonahan participated in these free speech fights, the sort of riots in Brunswick that were organised by the Communist Party in response to Victorian state government, who were banning what they called subversive gatherings, which would have been just, gathering of unemployed people protesting about lacking agency. And so there was a particular fight in the intersection of Phoenix Street and Sydney Road in Brunswick. And as part of this fight, the young Noel Coonahan addressed the crowd from inside the top of a truck in a locked cage. And police had to cut him out to the jeers of the crowd. And throughout the whole thing, he continued speaking in this beautiful metaphor for free speech. So, I mean, this in itself was a really interesting public artwork. The performative aspect of what he was doing was a very interesting, performance artwork. And then, so in 1994, Council commissioned Simon Perry to create this beautiful sculpture that commemorates, the sort of the delicacy of the gesture of free speech and how it can take off. So he's got a very traditional bust, a big plinth, which normally would have the statue of a dead white man on top of it, but instead of the dead white man, there is a beautiful rendering of a small dove, and this small dove obviously is about to take flight and spread the message of free speech in the way that Noel Coonahan's, performance art gesture did. So for me, this is a real prize within the Moreland Public Art Collection, because it speaks to, who we are, who we want to be, the kind of values that we want to uphold and that underpin, the city of Moreland. And other kinds of, another example of sort of public art that we have in council is the annual MoreArt exhibition. So this is in its 11th year now. Unfortunately, this has been postponed and is now being held in November, and these dates are incorrect. But the exhibition is MoreArt is a really interesting example of how public art can be responsive and temporary, and how it can respond to the forces that are all around us at a particular moment in time, and can capture those in the public. So in being outside, MoreArt is often held along the upfield bike path. And this is a space where people who might not go to galleries can encounter artwork. They can have encounters with something outside of their everyday that can uplift or shift or, move their thinking in some way, can open up new ways of being. And so for this year's MoreArt, I came up with this idea of monument to now through the process of deep listening or close listening to what is around us. And, I would never have known that, that monuments would be so under attack in this year. So it's been and also that the fact of now has become such a strange and remarkable time. So a lot of the works that, the artists have developed for this exhibition, I'm sure when we get to November, will have accumulated new resonances, and I'm giving the artists the opportunity to rethink and build in some of the experiences that they have had with this remarkable last 6 months of our lives. So It's an exhibition, so I'm going to have 8 newly commissioned site responsive works that are along the top part, the very northerly end of the Upfield bike path from Coburg to Gowrie. Got a couple of works in Faulkner Cemetery, and you know, I wanted to think about works that engage with these ideas of deep listening, so that we could listen to what is around us and create a monument to now, a monument to the moment that kind of captures all of the forces that are around us. There's site responsive walking tours by Sarah Walker and Emma Gibson, Liquid Architecture commissioning a work. These works that I've got here, this is Adam Cullen with the urns, and these sort of monuments that he creates, these kind of relics or monuments to people and the past. And then they'll be in Faulkner Cemetery, and then Myra Oosterwegel's performance works, which this is a still of one of them, will also be in Faulkner Cemetery. So she's, you know, her work is very interesting, and it questions the kind of colonial history and the heroics of those colonial forefathers that, you know, all of our things are named by Faulkner and Batman, and, you know, it casts these into question. Other artists in the exhibition this year will be Patrick Pound, Michael Pryor, Sarah Walker, Emma Gibson, Catherine Clover, as well as Liquid Architecture. So it's a really exciting lineup, and that's going to be from November the 5th until the 15th of this year. And that's just a really, you know, it's a really great opportunity in Moreland to think about who we are, where we're at, what's going on, what's current, and try and feed art to the community through these unexpected encounters, which hopefully will allow them to engage more deeply in their community, but also uplift and enhance their everyday. So I was going to now talk a little bit about some of the other work that I do as an independent curator, where I commission a lot of public art for private and public spaces, and work with developers and architects and fund managers, etc., to try and create really good public art. So I thought I'd do some sort of case studies of this, and I'd talk a bit about the process. And the process of, it's so strange not being able to see people's responses and take questions throughout. I wish that I could in this forum. So this is a kind of chart that I work with to show clients the commissioning process and how it operates. And for me, this is kind of best practice, because it allows a lot of input from the client, but it also allows enough time with each stage so that I can work closely with the artists and protect their agency within this process. So, you know, a typical process would be a client would come and they would have a building or a development that needed an artwork. And so they would invite me to create an opportunities for art document. And once you've done that document, then you can confirm the artwork, the location and the type, and you get sign off at each stage. So wherever I've put client input, that's the sign off that you'd get at each stage. So then you write the artwork brief, and then you get client input, they sign off on that. And then you create a short list of artists that you then present to the client, and then they sign off on that or not. It's often lots of negotiation at each of these client input opportunities. And then you would solicit proposals from shortlisted artists. So I'd go to the artist, talk them through it. I've got an example of a brief that I've written for one of the previous projects that I can show you the level of detail that you can expect in these artwork briefs when you're going for one of these commissions. And so then I would help the artist in any way that I could to solicit proposals from them. And, you know, often they might want to have site visits, or they might want to meet with the architect. So you try and facilitate and feed them with as much information as they need. And then I or the artist would present proposals to the selection committee, you know, and then we'd sign off on that, and then I'd commission the artist. And I work closely with the artist to help them through the contracting process, because there's a lot of different contracts out there, and you know, there are particular things to look out for in contracts that we can talk about a bit later if you need to. And you know, and then it's handing the work over. to the public. And so that is generally how the commissioning process works. And this is in council as well, but in council, client input is obviously council input as well as any other stakeholders that might be involved. And this is generally how it runs. So I'll just give an example of how it looks. And so to do that, I'm just going to talk about a most recent sculpture, public sculpture that I've just literally finished last week and has launched and is finished now. And it was this extraordinary playable sculpture that we commissioned by through an EOI process between City of Whitehorse and Fraser's property for a new development called Burwood Brickworks, obviously in Burwood. Really fascinating, very sustainable multi-use development, and you know, great. There's some great values that are within this development. So it was a long process to get to this sculpture. So I think I was working on it for about 2 years. Even just writing the brief took many months, 6 months, because it would go back to the council, come back with lots of feedback. It would go to the developer, come back with lots of feedback. Everybody, I'd have to send it to play auditors to get their feedback, and then build that all in a way so that it still maintained the original vision that I had for what this artwork might encapsulate. So I'm just going to try and share my screen now so that you can have a look at the brief that I wrote for this project, and I can talk about it a bit, hopefully. Sorry, won't be a minute. Just try this one, shall I? Nope. Sorry, everybody. I know where it is. Just going to reduce that. And bring up. Oh, sorry. Won't be a minute. There we go. So get right to the beginning of this document. Make sure you can all see it. There you go. Okay, so this was meant to start right at the beginning, but it didn't. So this is, Ange, can I get a thumbs up that you can see the right screen? Assuming that we can. Okay, good, thanks. So this is what the brief was that I sent to the artists. I selected 5 artists to be shortlisted for this particular project, and you know, the proposal was based on, you know, me digging around in the history of Burwood and Box Hill, which is right next door, and thinking through how to feed in some history into this new development, how to bring the past with us into this new development. So, you know, I started thinking about, you know, Frederick McCubbin, who used to, you know, do on plein air painting just next door to where this development is, and what it is, and when it was Box Hill, and they had the Box Hill artists group, artist camp. And I started thinking about how seeing the paintable qualities of that which lay immediately around us is a really beautiful thing to try and encourage people to do. And especially through public art, it's something that's a real aim for us to strive for. And so that was what I built the concept for this particular public art around. And again, this was done through lots of consultation with City of Whitehorse and with Fraser's property. Everyone had a lot of input into this brief. And, you know, so this is what you will get when you get a brief. You'll get really detailed information about the site, and, you know, the topography of the site, all these different, you know, the gradients that you have to work with, and, you know, any other kind of architecture plan for around the site, any kind of landscaping that's in there. And then within that, I've built in a lot of information about what the artwork needs to contain. So these are all things that the artwork needs to respond to, or could respond to, ideally. So, just thinking about this idea of biophilic design, and so drawing, because the project is underpinned by this sustainable living city accreditation that it achieved. It's the only place in Australia that's got it. It's this global accreditation system, because it processes all of its waste on site and gathers all of its water on site. It's this accredited living city development. And so I started, so I felt like that was really important to build some of those ideas into this particular brief, and also some of the City of Whitehorse's collection policies, because this work goes into the City of Whitehorse's collection now. So it's paid for by the developer, but then the City of Whitehorse get to own it. So it has to feed into their acquisitions policy and their priorities for public art as well. And then, of course, the play guidelines. So these are things which are very strict and legally enforceable, and potentially litigious if you don't adhere to them. So these are very important. And so the City of Whitehorse had play space strategies that we fed into it, as well as a government accreditation of playable sculptures and play spaces. And then thinking about how we might achieve some of these very strict things through quite interesting techniques. So, bringing natural materials, water and play not able to be accommodated. So various things that we couldn't do, stimulating as many senses as possible. There was lots of things that, council really wanted, for example, to have, a wide age group of people, who could encounter this artwork. And so we had to try and appeal to all different age groups and all abilities, obviously. So it had to be prams, wheelchairs, all kinds of different abilities. And so then there was design requirements and, the key principles again. And then obviously you give the budget. And this is something I thought, might be quite interesting. This shows the process, and it shows, because when you come up with a fee in your fee schedule, you need to break it down into milestones, and you need to understand what you have to achieve for each of these milestones, and then the fee is attributed based on the successfully achieving of those milestones. So we've got the art consultants milestones, developer milestones, artist milestones, council milestones. So at each of these points, the council or that person needs to come together and provide particular information so that the project can continue. And you'll see, I've got the timeline along the side of it. And so there's stages of planning for art, recommendations of artists, stage 2, stage 3 is the artist proposal. And you'll see all of the different tasks and duties that are necessary within each of these processes. Proposals from the artists, the commissioning, so signing of the contract, and signing of the contract took 6 months because it went between 3 sets of lawyers. So it was a long process, held things up somewhat. And, then the various, at what point do the play space auditors come in? They need to come in, do a desktop review, and then they need to come in during installation and check, and then they need to sign off on it once it's fully installed. So, council really had a lot of input into at what point this work is audited for safety and for its playability. And you can see how it goes. So yeah. And then obviously operations and maintenance, so technical information that needed to be included, various reviews, acknowledgements, interpretations, all of the different ideas. And then at the end, or within a brief, the person commissioning it will provide usually a palette of ideas, or this indicative palette of ideas. And these are images that have been signed off by all the stakeholders. And so if you're an artist presented with these, it's not saying make work exactly like this. It's saying these are the kind of works that the stakeholders like. So pay attention. And obviously you provide a huge variety, but it is a good guide for artists to kind of think through, right, that's the sort of work that they want. So now I'll just show you the successful proposal, Alex's proposal. So he's a very experienced artist, public artist. He's done huge sculptures, and so, you know, working with him, you know, it was best practice. So his proposal, he goes into it's drawing on this idea of the ladybird, and, you know, the coloration and the sculptural form of them, you know, the sort of friendliness of them, their use within popular culture. And then he came up with this beautiful sculptural interpretation of the ladybird's wings as a playable, climbable, cubby house, laddery, swinging, jumping, wonderful thing. And you know, with the footholds and, you know, various treatments. And so that's the concept. And then he goes into more detail, different views of what it is. And it's interesting looking at these because it's exactly what it's ended up looking like. It's quite amazing how accurate these renders are. And so trying to appeal to teenagers so they can sit in these chairs, and children, so that little children, so they can climb underneath them and climb on top of them. And, you know, it really is a very successful work in the way that it met all of the different criteria in the brief. And, you know, he goes into quite a lot of detail about how they're constructed and what sort of, you know, the heights, how he's worked out, you know, different, you know, playground norms. He's made playable sculptures before, so, you know, so there's some really beautiful fabrication, safety, utility, all of these things. And so it's a very interesting, you know, he's gone right into some serious detail here, and then, you know, then he's included some previous work as well. So he did, I don't know how many people have been to the Children's Hospital, he did the beautiful sculpture in there called The Creature, really amazing work. And so, you know that he can deliver. So he presents projects that show his ability to work at this scale with these kind of expectations for the work's durability and longevity. These are, you know, other works that he's done. So he didn't necessarily, there was a CV attached or a link to his website or something, but it was more a demonstration of, yes, I make this work. This is how it goes. This is what it looks like. I am capable of creating work at this scale. And so he did create work at this scale, and it was a spectacular achievement. Perhaps I'll show you, Angela, have I got time to just show a few contracts? Thumbs up, please, or down? Yes, okay, so, so this process, as I was mentioning, it had so many different stakeholders and so much input from different people that the contracting process was very convoluted. So I'll show you what I usually work with, and this is a contract that I try and use wherever I can. I've used it with projects with Lend-Lease, I've used it with projects with CBUS, I've used it with projects, state government, all sorts of different clients have used this, but for some reason Fraser's Property wanted to use their own contract, which was quite problematic because it was, as you'll see, so this is my the contract I usually work with. It's very concise and to the point. It's 16 pages, but it's, you know, it's concise. It just talks about who it is, the definitions of what, you know, what things are, the terms of the commission, excuse me, breaks it all down, and, you know, the commission price, what's included in the commission price, yeah, when the artist will install the work, all of these different things, what the design is, and, you know, when you'll provide things, it's very self-explanatory, acceptance of the design, changes of the design, what's allowed, what's not allowed, it's very clear. And of all the contracts that I've found and worked with, this is one that protects the rights of the artists most succinctly. It's, you know, it talks about any changes to the work and also rejection of the work. So, you know, if the client rejects the work, the artist will still get paid, that sort of thing, which has happened in the past, interestingly. So, you know, this contract has worked. And so the inspection, access, installation of the work, if there's any delays, you know, the artist will agree, what sort of process you have, what happens if you die, terrible, you have to think of everything, and the copyright, so who owns it, who owns the merchandising. Copyright always remains with the artist. You can choose to let them use images. What I suggest is you say that they can use images to promote that particular facility that it's in, but if they then turn it into merchandising, postcards or whatever, then that's prohibited. So maintenance plans, so these are the things that you need to include when you're when you finish the project. You hand over a maintenance manual, and in the maintenance manual it has all of the information that the client knows that they need to adhere to in order to keep the work at its optimal standard. So, you know, what your materials are, what the best way of looking after them is, what the best kind of, exactly what the paint colors are, where to buy them, where to source them, all of that information so that your work can keep looking its best. You need to provide all of that information upon handover. And in the contract, I usually say that you won't get your final milestone payment until you've handed over your maintenance manual, just to make sure that everyone's work is protected. Repairs, restorations, alteration, if the work is indemnity, insurance, all of these things should be in the contract and should be quite clear. Default, termination, any kind of problem, disputes, you know, you need to have all of these things in this contract. And then you have your schedules. And so this is the sketches or CAD drawings or SketchUps or whatever of the work, and this is a contractual agreement. So you're saying this is what I am going to produce, and so it's very important in the schedule that you put what you're going to produce in there, so that you can, if the client comes to you and says, but this isn't what I expected, you can say, well, let's look at the Schedule A of the contract. This is what I proposed, so you signed off on this. And then you do your fee schedule, your commission, price, installments, etc. And then a timeline, so how long you need, and you agree on this. So this is often a point of contention. It might be something that you have to negotiate. So that's the usual contract that I work with, and I'll show you the one, just a quick example of the one that we worked with Fraser's. So this was, whoops, sorry. This was 20 pages long, but the font size is like 6. So, you know, it was very detailed and extremely, you know, there was lots of problems, all the highlighted bits of things that we edited. It was, you know, if someone gives you a contract like this, get a lawyer, basically. You know, there are lots of great arts lawyers out there, but if you get presented with a contract that looks like this and is actually something that's intended, it's not intended for artwork, it's intended for building contractors. So it's lots of information in there that is not relevant to you, and lots of sort of legal liability that is not up to you and not your responsibility as an artist. You don't get paid enough to carry a lot of this stuff. So yeah, so these are all, like, the highlighted bits are the notes that, you know, that the artist put in, or the artist lawyer put in. So I mean, it was a huge, long process, and I won't go into it, it's confidential, blah blah blah. But yeah, you can see the difference. So yeah, that is one way of approaching it. And yes, so that was kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I think I've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to. So maybe afterwards we can talk about some of the examples, some of the opportunities we have at Council coming up for artists to get engaged with Council. There are quite a few public art opportunities that will be arising in the next little while, as well as MoreArt. So MoreArt happens every year. But with the parks close to home developments, there's going to be some public art components in that and various other developments that are going on around Moreland, all of which have opportunities for art to be involved in. So I will hand over to Leon now, I think, if that's good, Ange. Thumbs up? No?
Yes, please do, Emily. Thank you.
All right, okay, try and change host. And as I'm very happy to keep talking about any of these things in the end. So, yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Take it away.
Promising. Now.
Leon, we'll need your video back on too.
Yeah. Thanks. Oh. Great. That's good. Working. Wrong screens. I know. One moment. There we go. Does that look right now?
That's great. Thanks, Leon.
Great. Okay, good. Thanks. Hi. It's fantastic, Emily. That was just an amazing presentation, going from concept right through to brass tacks of contract. Tough act to follow. I'll be talking mostly, well, at first about the too many different programs. The RenuWall program, which start off that, which came out of. It's been informed by successful programs similar to it in numerous municipalities throughout Australia and the world. So basically, we're looking at addressing the issues of graffiti and tagging by commissioning large-scale murals in graffiti and tagging hotspots. So this year, this first round, we've ended up, which basically all happened in the first half of this year, the first quarter really, and then this coronavirus thing has just delayed the whole program and pushed it into the next financial year, which has given us a few headaches, but it's back on track. So for 2020, the artist Mike Megatron has got the image you can see there is 260 Sydney Road. That's not his work. That's what the wall looked like a couple of weeks ago. Netflat has the Barclay Street Park, massive 44-metre long, 10-metre high wall all along the back of Barclay Street Park there, which is at the back of Barclay Square Shopping Centre, at the end of the car park there. Texture Queen has the Manilac Street site in Brunswick, which is near Jewel Station, and it's between Jewel Station and Sydney Road, and near the RMIT Fashion and Textiles campus. And Devate has this series of little walls along 129 Harding Street, Coburg, which is a little sort of development of townhouses that back onto the Merri Creek Reserve area, Merri Creek Trail. So how did we arrive at these artists and these locations? Yeah, Emily's given us some good insight into the back end of art commissions, and I'm going to continue some of that with just the specifics of this one. So the program was set up, and basically I was appointed to manage it. So the first thing was to find some locations and also put word out there and try and find artist networks, make sure we were tapped thoroughly into them, knew exactly what was out there and how to contact them, and also try and attract some sponsors because our budget was pretty, it was modest. So to find locations, there was a 2019 independent scoping study was done for council, and that made numerous recommendations and observations of what was successful and what hadn't been, and where some of the trouble spots were. But we also listened to some of the community-nominated sites. Council gets inquiries about, from businesses and residents and resident groups, community groups, asking about what can we do about graffiti, or can we get a mural painted here? And so that was all fed into this big pool of data. The street cleansing team at council also, of course, knew very well where many of the trouble spots were, and so we started seeing patterns overlapping here, where we go, okay, there's a lot of intersections here where we could find, intersections of different stakeholders, where we could find some good walls to do this with. And then, I also did a lot of trawling different main roads to and from work, taking different routes to see what was out there, what was going on, and a bit of trawling Google Street View as well. Very, very handy. So from there, we identified several sites, and we started trying to contact owners of those, find out who owned some of these walls. Some of that was known to us already. Others weren't. And from that, we sort of had to figure out which ones were actually going to be achievable within the time frame that we had. And although some of the spots would be great, it was clear that we might not get a definite yes from some of the stakeholders as to whether we were able to use that space or not, or there might have been access issues to it and that sort of thing. We had to get this up and done before end of financial year, so it was down to what was achievable in that time. That's right. So in the end, looking for a bit of sponsorship and that, there were a few things, again, that didn't come through due to time, but we did manage to get some additional funding from different departments within council, and one of the company that owns the Barclay Square development. So once we'd established how much we had to spend and where the walls were, we put together an EOI document to go out to artists to just sort of give them all the information we could give, and how much budget we had for each site, and through sort of largely through the research that we've done, figured out what best ways there were of promoting that. And we figured, Triple R hits a very creative community. It's got dedicated arts programs, stuff like that. So that was that was a fairly easy one. And yeah, I'd found a lot of good contacts through just internet research and looking up names on walls and then researching them. So managed to get a lot of stuff out by direct email to places like Juddy Roller and Land of Sunshine, and blogs, and lots of blogs and sort of street art and graph art community sites. We did a bit of social media as well, and Arts Hub, to hit the people who look at the more conventional arts notices. So we ended up with 72 proposals from more than 47 artists and collectors, actually, because I think one of them is so it should be more like 50, actually. So to go through all that and compile it into something that was actually fairly consistent and readable for a selection panel. And this was a lesson hard learnt the first time around. We really should have had a standard form online for it, because despite the guidelines, proposals came in many different forms. So it's a lot of work getting that into something that could be condensed and given to a panel of 6 assessors for an initial score, to just sort of give us a short list of who was actually in the running and for which sites and which particular proposal. Some artists had actually provided like up to 3 different proposals for the same site. So, and whereas others had pretty much sort of like 1 proposal covering 4 different sites. So we had an assessment panel of 3 people from the Arts and Culture Unit at Moreland, as well as a representative Places Manager for Brunswick, and Urban Design as well, and a community representative who was from the Moreland Arts Advisory Committee. So once they'd gone through and scored all that, I crunched the numbers and came up with some finalists. Because some of the scores were just really tightly packed. There wasn't much difference between sort of 2nd and 7th place. So in some of them, so Berkeley Street Park, we ended up, as you can see on the screen here, there were 9 in the short list, which is it's a fairly long short list to get through in one meeting. So yeah, anyway, but we got through it. So assessment meeting, there were actually only 5 of the previous assessors actually voting on it, because it was chaired by the Arts and Culture Unit Manager, Craig Rogers. So I'll go on to the next page. And we came up with 4 artists, which were, everyone was really pleased about, 4 designs and 4 artists that were, everyone on the panel was really pleased about. Very happy about those decisions. Whoops. I can't show you them right now because we haven't released images for them yet, because they're still draft and we are getting to the final ones before we actually want to go public with them. But you can see, yeah, that, as I said before, the 9 of the proposals there out of the, can't remember, 20-something proposals for Berkeley Street Park, and they vary very wildly. All right, so a few words about proposals, EIOIs and applications. General at first, don't overcommit, overpromise. It's not a contest of who gives the most for the least money. It's not about that. It's not about bargain hunting. And if you do hit a panel that has that mentality, then you probably don't want to get the commission. The selection panel, as Emily said before, they want to see, well, they want to see a clarity of vision and achievability. Is sort of the 2 watchwords, I think, or 2 very important phrases. They want to see a clarity of vision and that it's actually achievable, not some really big idea that that is a bit vague and sort of sure, can this actually be done? Where does this idea end? It's got to be fairly punchy and clear. You need to demonstrate your ability to actually complete the task, all the aspects of the task, really. So the creative design aspects, solving the technical aspects, and your general professionalism in dealing with council or the commissioning body, and other stakeholders in the issue. So whether you communicate well, whether you provided all the information that was asked for in the OI, Because if you haven't, or you've not done them properly, then that's sort of a first indication maybe this person isn't ready for this sort of level of commission, and that finally that you've worked at that scale as well. So that was one of the big issues with this particular round of commissions. Two of the sites were fairly modest, and we were hoping to see some people fairly early mid-career sort of work, give them a good opportunity with those, but it sort of worked out a bit differently. But for the Sydney Road one, which is about 10 metres high and 14 metres long, and the Barclay Street Park one, which is 44 metres long and 10 metres high, it's massive, massive wall, that they really needed to demonstrate that they had worked at something like that scale before. Because, yeah, working at that size just really introduces all sorts of issues that you don't, it's just painting, you know, a mural on one small wall of a house. One thing I was really surprised to find was a couple of artists using images of other people's work as examples of what their work was going to look like. And that really, really doesn't work. I mean, except in the sort of very specific condition where if there's a technical material or solution to a problem that is sort of an issue with that site or with the work you want to do on that site, whether it's if it's some sculpture that's embedded, something embedded in glass or printed into glass that has to be mounted into paving or something like that. So this is, we're looking outside of RenuWall for that sort of idea. But then, yeah, maybe use, you know, some specific photos of how that system works and demonstrate that you've contacted the company that does that stuff or that makes that material. So you can say, yeah, this is achievable. It has been done before, and this is the way I'm going to do it. But yeah, otherwise, you know, just grabbing images from photo stock type places or from other artists' artwork is not a good sign. It doesn't look good. If you don't have experience at a specific part of your project, allow for an expert. So yeah, allow for an expert within the timeline and also budget. There may be some specific issues, such as another example that I've got coming up after this, where in order to cover yourself and make sure that you're doing things properly, you need a consulting engineer, for example. Then you have to find out how much it's going to cost to get one of those and how much time you need to allow them to do a site inspection or to look at your drawings and then to develop their own drawings and get back to you and confirm that that's all correct and that's going to work, and then have a final document that you can present to them. You don't have to do all that work for the OI, but you have to know how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost to do that and what information is going to be needed. So there's, yeah, here I've got on the ground, over ground, overhead, who's responsible. This is a beautiful little example of this. We had a commission for a public artwork to go either out the front of Brunswick Town Hall or out the front of the Mechanics Institute. And we had we got down to a short list of projects, and sort of none of them were really working in that space. And and long story short is we ended up with this wonderful bronze tubular bell object, which then was going to be installed somewhere here behind the Brunswick Library in the lovely, Saxon Street little parklet redevelopment there. which is a beautiful little spot. If you haven't visited there, go and check it out, and go and check out the bell. It's really a magical little thing to find. That had only just been recently completed at that stage, and we were trying to figure out where to put this bell. And you know, looking on the surface there, it looks like you could put it anywhere and it'd be pretty good. You know, there's a lot of choice where you could put it, but then, oops. If you look next to that photo, that is a diagram of the Yarra Valley water. Oh no, that's contractors' analysis of what's underneath that. There's tons and tons of stuff running under that little patch of ground there, under that paving, and the gravel there, and the sort of rain garden area. There are high voltage cables, there's sewer lines, there's high pressure water lines, there's irrigation, there's all sorts of other things. I can't even remember what's under there. But just about wherever we wanted to put the thing, there was stuff underneath the ground. And the artist's consulting engineer had drawn up the footing for this bell, which is 3 meters tall and weighs a hell of a lot. I can't remember what it was, probably like 660 kilograms or something. It's over half a ton, I think, anyway. And so that needed a really big base on it, a steel reinforced concrete base, 1.1 meters cubed. So trying to find where to put that, we had like a couple of good spaces lined up, and I had to very quickly learn how to communicate with Yarra Valley Water and what information they needed and what information I needed. And but they were great. I was really surprised. They responded really quickly and really clearly to things. There was only one customer service officer who sort of dropped the ball on a couple of things, but everyone else was great there. So yeah, we figured out where we're going to put it, and then I engaged the contractors who were still working in the area, who had originally installed all this, to install the footing for it, because it had to be made by qualified people. So on the day when we went to mark up where it was going, me and the guy responsible for the project was and we ended up marking up a completely different spot to what we'd done on all the plans, and which you can see there in the picture. So yeah, there can be a lot of factors in a specific site that you're not yet aware of when you first look at it. So it's good to check them out and sort of be able to cross off things that aren't possible or are going to be too difficult or too expensive before you get to the end design and go up and then do it, and then you realize that you've run out of time to actually solve these problems before the work's supposed to be finished and signed off. I had the same sort of thing. I'm going to bring my house into that because it's a very similar experience. We got through the entire design approval process through council and heritage overlay and everything, every T crossed and every I dotted. And then the architect looked up at the power lines next to our house and went, oh, better check about those in case we need to crane stuff in. And it turned out they were 6.6 kilovolt power lines running along one side of our house, which looked pretty much just like ordinary power lines, but it meant the exclusion zones for them were more than double the normal, which basically just cut a whole swathe through the upper story and even through the lower story of it, the renovation we were going to be doing, and actually theoretically cut through the old 1860s house, which had been there before it. So yeah, soon learnt that city power and power core take 6 weeks roughly between communications. So you don't want to have to do something where you want a power line adjusted or slightly moved or anything like that, because it's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks, even just between one communication and the next, and just between requesting something and getting a drawing of it. Got a few other time lags here. Heritage Victoria can take 1 to 6 weeks to give you an informal decision or informal advice on something. And then, from that, you still have to go through the process of completing a form and submitting that as well. So if you're dealing with a site that has heritage protection, just check out what you can before you start proposing anything that's going to be anchoring into a historic wall or obstructing vision of anything, a historical building or something like that. If you want to contact Wurundjeri Council, they require a lot of time as well. They've got a very small staff who are very overworked and do an amazing job, but it does mean that they can take a long time to get back to you just because of their sheer workload and lack of authorized people and lack of budget. So you'd contact them for questions on history of an area, site significance, names, or language to do with an area, and make sure that anything you're intending gets fully approved beforehand, because it's you don't want to be disrespecting. NBN and Telstra and Optus, you'll see they've got pits and boxes and overhead cables for the old cable TV networks, but some of which are still running, and underground cables as well. So just check if you're doing a sculptural thing that needs to be going to the ground, make sure you check everything that could be around there. Council can sometimes help with that. So, so don't be afraid of spending some time calling around and trying to find the right person who knows about that stuff. Even as someone working within council, it's hard to tell sometimes who actually has the information that you need, or who can refer you to the right department or right company. All right. Covering yourself. So I've mentioned consulting engineers. If you are putting in something that's sort of big and heavy, like this bronze bell going in there on site, then you're going to want to make sure that it's safe and it passes all sorts of standards. So you're going to need consulting engineers, and they cost money and they need particular information. And there's some things where they're just going to go, nope, you probably can't do that, or it's not worth doing that. Or you may encounter others that say, yeah, we can do that. And they don't get back to you, as I've experienced as well. So yeah, if you don't know exactly the details, the legalities of what to do, then consult an expert. Consulting engineers, council officers, and a great resource is just peers with specific experience doing things similar to what you're proposing to do. I just tapped into that just the other day and got in contact with an artist that I'd worked with a few years ago at Curators Gallery, and I think once since then, who one of the things he'd been doing for us at the time at council was large-scale photographic paste-ups onto council assets, such as public toilets, that sort of thing. We'd had a lot of trouble with actually in this same location here where the bell is, with some paste-ups some artists had done, and they just, despite them having tested them out for months beforehand and everything, tested their materials and their techniques, they just weren't lasting on the walls as well as they or we had hoped. And so I tapped into this guy who I knew had done the stuff and worked so successfully that he's getting work all over Australia and internationally now. And he gave me a good lead on specific materials and a local company to sort of start with. So yeah, artists, if you've got if you're following someone on Instagram and you've had brief dialogues with them before, and they've given you good responses to your comments and that sort of thing, then they could be a good resource to ask, hey, what was that material you used for that, or who was the company who did that for you, or what was this experience like? Was this, was this job, looked really tricky from what you've posted? Was it worth doing? Yes, contractual stuff. Put it in writing. When is the job finished? The period of warranty and handover of public liability are two important things that will usually be covered by a contract such as Emily had there. And yeah, I've seen issues as well where companies want to use a standard contract that is far more suited to a building contractor than an artist, and there's a lot of irrelevant clauses there, and we've had to deal with that a few times. So it's really important to get advice if there's anything on there that isn't crystal clear, or that you think is specifically not relevant to what you're doing and could be it could be problematic. Then yeah, get some legal advice, arts law, or again ask around peers who've done similar projects, who might have had some experience in that, as to where they got advice from. Yeah, but knowing of building into your whole proposal, that this idea, this knowledge that when is the job finished? Who signs off on it, and when do they sign off on it? And to say that you've actually delivered what was promised, and so you can get paid, and so that it's the contract is completed. So you've got to have basically your public liability insurance is covering it until the project is finished, until it's signed off on, basically, and then the commissioner's public liability should take over after that. But you've got to make sure that both or three parties are aware of that, and actually have that in writing, because you don't want to be legally responsible for something 2 years after you installed it and find that whoever the developer corporation or the council hasn't maintained it to the instructions that you left them. And then what is sort of the period of warranty, which I think is pretty important. If an issue arises with the work in 3 months after it's been installed, obviously that's fairly likely to be something to do with either your construction of it or the engineers or whoever, or fabricators, whoever else you've had working on there. That's important to nut out sort of who is responsible for that, and when does your responsibility end. I have already talked about this now, really. Yeah, it's important to know who you're dealing with in the corporation or the council. You may have one primary contact officer, but then then contractual stuff may be sent off up to a higher authority for actual sign-off. It's good to sort of be aware of the process and also of the timelines of that, because frequently it'll have to go through, in council, definitely has to go through a couple of sort of tiers to get to the person who finally signs off on the whole project. That means, yes, we are satisfied with your work, but the job's been done, and we're releasing the rest of the funds to you. So that's covered that. Oh, general advice on EOIs and calls for applications is absolutely, definitely read the entire document first, then read it again and take notes. Can't stress that enough. And then go away and have your creative ideas, and then come back and read it another time. I would advise at least 3 times the whole document. The art. Okay, yes, the artwork is going in a particular place, and therefore it's going to a particular audience, a particular community. It's important to understand who that is. A site visit is really important. Spending a bit of time in the site and doing a bit of analytical looking, a bit of deep listening to the site, seeing who actually frequents there, what sort of activities go on here, other than the sort of officially sanctioned ones. You know, if you go to Berkeley Street Park, you can see, and you just sort of do a slow walk around the park, you can see, okay, there's signs of, you know, drinking and littering and a little bit of drug use, heaps of tagging, a little bit of minor vandalism, but then right next to it, it's also got some really nice townhouses, a row of really nice townhouses. So there's a real mix of different users and communities there. And so, yeah, that mural that's going on that wall has to really respect the people who live right next to it, as well as the people who aren't living right on it, but use the park all the time. It's got to speak to all of them. Okay, yeah, the proposal is for the selection panel, but the artwork is ultimately for the community. So the selection panelists they have to see the relevance to that community, as well as for their own concerns, their own department. So as I said, we had representatives from other parts of council, and which is great, they come to it with a completely different eye and bring different requirements or concerns to the mix. So it's kind of good to know what kind of people are going to be on the panel. And even if you don't know exactly, you should get the idea that there's quite different stakeholders. There's going to be some people who understand art speak, who come from an arts background, and there's going to be other people who come from more of an architectural or urban design background, and other people who come from just purely a maintenance background, and other people who come from more of a strategic and sort of more political background. And you've got to communicate to all those people clearly. So it's good to sort of avoid using too much art talk. This isn't an art school essay. It's not, an art school crit session. By all means, include a bit of high concept in there, but keep your language and the bulk of your proposal to something that can be understood by anyone. Here's another one. If you haven't done anything like this before, then maybe you shouldn't be proposing it. If you're doing a commission with a decent price tag attached to it, then, you know, as I've mentioned before, in responding to the EOI or the proposal call out, demonstrating that you've got past experience in that is really important. But yeah, also having that past experience is really important too. If I'd advise, don't go and propose something that's completely new to you, where there's quite a few unknowns. You can, by all means, reach. You progress your career and the scale that you can work at by reaching a little further each time, but you know, try and only do one variable at a time. It's like take one footstep into the unknown and leave the other 99 on the ground where you already know it's going to work, so that you can actually guarantee that you can pull it off and it doesn't turn into a nightmare that comes back to bite you. Oh yeah, there we go. I've got that in the last line. You should aim for no more than one unknown factor, really. And I think that is pretty much the end of me. I'm sure there'll be things that come out of questions for this.
Thank you very much, Leon. And Emily as well, if you'd like to come back on screen when you've got when you're ready. Now, this is a good time, just while Emily and in particular Leon has a moment to just breathe again. There is a Q&A section where you can ask your questions. So if you want to type your questions down there, we have 2 at the moment, which I'll now ask Leon and Emily to address. But any more, just please put them in there. We've got about another, say, 20 minutes or so. But, you know, if we don't have that many questions, then obviously we won't need to go all the way until 2. So just while everyone else is writing their questions, so if you just go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. Well, there we go, another person's pop one in. So just add all your questions there and I'll get started with the first one while everyone else is writing theirs. So Emily, these first 2 questions popped up during your presentation, so perhaps I'll address those to you, and then the one that's just popped in, I'll open it up. So Amanda asked, how do you identify artists to shortlist for commissions? So Emily, if you could address that one.
So I'm always researching artists, and my research is, you know, when I'm allowed to go into galleries. At the moment it's mostly web-based, obviously, magazines, you know, a lot on the internet, a lot through artists' websites, Instagram, gallery sites, just the digital. If you can try and use the digital platform to benefit your work, it really will help you, because it's all about visibility, and you really just need to get your work out there. I wonder if that's what you were asking, or if you were asking which artists I choose for which commissions. Just on the first thing, I'm assuming that, Amanda, you're an artist and you're asking that for your own benefit. So I just did a quick Google search of your name, Art Melbourne, and you know, I didn't get any work. So again, I'm just saying that you really need to, if you want to get out there, if you want to be featured in commissions, if you want to get invited, then you need to build up a web presence as much as possible. Alternatively, of course, you can always send things, you know, make friends with me on LinkedIn, find me on Instagram, connect with me wherever you can, send me physical stuff to the office, whatever. Go through all of the different galleries or public art councils that you want to work with, and send them stuff, connect with them. You know, it's just a process of creating networks, so that you increase your visibility, activating your networks that you might already have, just profiling yourself. I mean, and the internet's quite good because you can hide behind it a little bit and just show your work and not necessarily have to go and do coffee dates constantly. But yeah, it's so definitely. And then, you know, the second part of the question, how do I identify which artist to shortlist for which commissions? I mean, obviously, I'll have information coming from the stakeholders that is feeding into the brief, and then in my mind that will immediately be connecting with particular kinds of practice, particular artists, particular media, scale, subject matter, all of those things. And so in my mind, as I'm writing a brief, I will be connecting it with artists or practices or kinds of practice that I'm already aware of. And then once I've got that, then I'll start doing a bit of internet research, a bit of reading, going and seeing things, and finding artists that sit well within that brief, because obviously you want each commission to benefit the artist's practice. You don't want to be putting an artist in a briefing situation where her work or his work is totally unsuited, so it needs to be of benefit to you and of benefit to your practice and developing it and deepening it. So it's feeding all of those things in, but I would just strongly urge any artist who hasn't got a web presence to try and get one.
Yeah, there's a lot of good free ones you can do these days, like Wix. You just have to put up with a small banner on your website. But yeah, further to that, good documentation of your finished work, and especially and documentation of the processes. If you have research and community engagement processes in your work, then make sure that's well documented. And often that requires getting someone else to do photography for you. So you a couple of good photos of you leading a workshop or something, or of your finished installed work are just really key. Yeah.
And I've just added.
I take that back, Amanda. I did find Amanda Shackleton, and you have got a website. So I take all of that back. Sorry. Find you, and I'm going to look.
Thanks, Amanda, for sending that extra information through. Just to what Leon was just saying in terms of the websites and the social media and things. Remember, though, that we are working with a visual art form, so it really needs to be quality. Don't just whack anything up. That's it cannot be. You've just got to really aim for that high quality. So the next question.
I'm just going to say, Amanda, this is a beautiful website. Yeah.
Beautiful, lovely.
Preaching to the converted, clearly.
The next question was, how does this process, so Emily, again, you were talking about some pretty significant budgets earlier on in your presentation. And Angie, and I'm not sure whether Angie goes by Angie or Ange, because I'm an Ange personally, but she's got an E, so my apologies if I'm saying your name incorrectly.
Yeah.
How does this process work with a tiny budget? What gets cut out and what is crucial and still must be considered regardless of finances?
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends who's commissioning it, and how many stakeholders are involved, how much consultation you're going to need to do with community and different stakeholders that are particularly relevant to each site. But basic principles would be, for me, to always make sure that whatever you're doing, you've got sign off from the stakeholder that there's a clarity in your communication. So when you're developing the brief, make sure you get sign off from the client or the stakeholder to ensure that they're across all of the things that you're writing in the brief, because everything is in the brief. Everything in the project needs to be in the brief, because then if there's ever any conjecture or disagreement down the track, you can go back to the brief and say, it was in the brief, that's why it's in the project. So a really good brief, getting sign off, transparency of communication, and then a really good contract that protects the rights of the artist. And a clear, transparent fee schedule. I mean, those are the three key parts of the project to make sure that the funds, that are dispersed in a timely way according to a transparent and mutually agreed milestone. So even in a tiny budget, those processes should be in place. Even if it's just a quick email, CC to everyone and some written agreement, if it's a tiny project, that's what it might be. But as long as those three stages of the process are transparently communicated and agreed on by everybody. So hopefully that answers your question. Ange?
Thank you. Yes, and it was Ange, not Angie. So thanks, Ange. Natalie asks, could an artist present a proposal onto the council at any time, or does the artist need to wait for a grant opportunity to do so?
Leon, I don't mind.
Well, for RenuWall, for example, it's when there's an opportunity, we put out an EI, and when it's coming up, we'll put out an announcement on social media that it's going to come up soon. There's really nothing in between.
Yeah, and also
we don't have a mechanism for that.
And also because proposals should be opportunity specific. You know, your proposal should be responding to a particular opportunity that has arisen within council or within, you know, any other kind of thing, an exhibition even. So there's not really room within the programs that we operate that for just a proposal just to appear. If you have an idea for a public artwork, you can always, you know, suggest, I think, that we should commemorate this sector of the community through a public art in this location. Then you can always, if you're a community member, you can always submit those proposals. But it's a slight conflict of interest if you're an artist saying, I suggest that we put this, make this public artwork, and I've got a great artwork that could, you know, serve this purpose. It's something that would have to go to a public EOI, but absolutely, if you've got an idea for something that council needs to address, then certainly send those ideas in, and they all get processed through official, you know, processes. But yeah, you can send in your work, and you can send in, you know, connect with us and show us your work absolutely anytime you want. But there's no point in presenting a proposal if there's no opportunity that goes with it, because they have to be site responsive.
And just in response to that, I did in the chat section earlier this session put down our Arts Moreland Facebook page and our Arts Moreland e-newsletter. So I would highly, highly suggest, strongly suggest that you actually like our Facebook page and our and get onto our e-newsletter, because that is where all of these opportunities are sent out first. So by being in those loops, you'll know before, you know, it filters out through the rest of the network. So we've done that question. Natalie again, are there opportunities for non-resident artists?
Do you mean not Moreland based, I guess?
I'm assuming she means non-Moreland based artists.
Or not Australian residents, because we did have that come up with RenuWall as well.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps, I mean, well, let's go non-Moreland, because if you're non-Moreland, you're also not Australian.
I mean, there's no strict rule, but it is a weighting process, isn't it? So, you know, if you are Moreland based, your proposal will be weighted slightly heavier, because, you know, we do try and support local artists as much as possible. Exactly. But if your proposal's extraordinary and you're like, you know, this world famous artist who wants to do a project in Moreland, whose work really fits the brief, then, you know, we might consider it. But
I think I'll just speak from the arts officer point of view here, just in general. And for those that don't know, I also manage the arts grants within the Arts and Culture Department. As a general rule across all of our guidelines, our funding applications and also these sorts of commissions are generally for Moreland artists or Moreland-based arts organisations, and for projects that are for the Moreland community. So even unless your guideline specifically says it's only for Moreland artists, and again, all of this will be in the guidelines and the briefs that that you will be reading multiple times before you apply, and I'll just say again, multiple times, it'll all be in there, but they will generally be that if you're not a Moreland artist or arts organisation, then the actual project needs to benefit Moreland and the Moreland community. So, you know, you can be from, you know, interstate or potentially international, but it's got to actually benefit our community here. The next question, which may have been, I feel like this is addressed, but I'll read it out anyway, just in case there's anything to add. Tamara asked, does Moreland ever commission internal works?
I'm not quite clear on what an internal
what's that
work is.
Mara, perhaps you could add a little bit more to that in the question. I'll move on to your next question then. So while you're doing that, so Tamara's next question was, and where do you find commission work being published? Is there a website where developers, etc., put up commissions? Oh,
great idea. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
No, there's no central database for public artworks. I mean, you know, there are blogs that try and sort of account for them, and
Arts Hub does a bit of that. So yeah, being a member of Arts Hub is always good. Yeah. All the sort of call outs go to there.
And
Actually.
NAVA as well. NAVA would sort of promote a lot of that sort of work, a lot of those sort of things as well.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, those two are the main places in Australia where you would find, you know, but but often developers don't put them out publicly.
Mm.
Yeah,
They'll engage a curator
yeah,
like yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so Tamara's also come back. So
Oh,
with regards to Moreland ever commissioning internal works, she's asked, meaning textiles or foil work.
oh, right.
Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. If there's a site that needs it, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And we would do an EOI, same sort of process if it was that. Yeah.
Right. So, oh gosh, now I'm confused. Stuff that can be left in the elements. I think that was referring to,
Stuff that can't be left in the elements.
oh, sorry, can't be left in the elements. Yes, okay. Okay, so are there any other questions that anyone has?
Non-Australian artists was what she was talking about.
All right. Yeah, it does become a bit harder with payment and contracts and things like that. But
And also just physically, I'm imagining that Natalia, you live in Melbourne, but you're you know, not a permanent resident. So it would all depend on that, because obviously if it's a public artwork, as Leon was saying, it's very important to visit the site, to become familiar with all of the things that occur in the site. So, you know, if you lived here and worked here, but you were not, I don't know actually.
yeah, we did come across that with RenuWall, and pretty much the answer was if you have an Australian bank account
Yeah.
and you are here, if you're here on a working visa, then that makes it easier.
You'd need a
But I
tax
think as an artist,
number.
you're sort of a contractor anyway. You go in it with a contract, so it's pretty much just an Australian bank account. But
And a
that
tax
said,
number.
it can be problematic still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if there was a particular project or commission that you're looking to apply for, the best thing would be to actually contact the arts officer or the public arts officer and speak to them specifically, because then they'll actually have the specific guidelines in front of them. So, and then it'll be an easier question to answer, because those guidelines will let them know.
Yes.
There doesn't appear to be any more questions. Last chance if anyone has anything else to ask rather. Just while we do give people that opportunity, I actually just want to take this opportunity then to thank you both, Emily and Leon, for your wonderful presentations. I've loved listening to them, and it's been wonderful to actually hear a bit more about what you do, even though we share the same, well, normally share the same office.
Same virtual office.
Virtual office. It's been amazing just hearing sort of the more detailed intricacies of what you do in your role. Now, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you. Will on your panelist screen notice this other name, Laura Milkigana? I just wanted to thank Laura, who has been very, very kind in allowing us to utilise her Zoom platform and her enormous experience in online presentations, and Laura's been helping us sort of back of house. So thank you so much, Laura, for all of your help.
Thanks, Laura.
So I think that's it then. We might wrap up. I have, yes, Eddie, great. I will address that question outside of this session. So thanks very much, everyone. And yeah, if you've got any questions, I'll be sending out the Zoom recording and a copy of the presentations, the PowerPoint presentations, and any other sort of resources that I think might be useful to you. There'll also be a link to a very, very, very quick survey that I'd love you all to take the opportunity to fill out. It's seriously short. It's like a minute at most. And I'll get that out in the next day or so. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thanks again, Leon, Emily, and Laura, for everything today.
Thank you,
Great.
Ange.
Thank you, Ange. It's been great.
Bye.
Bye.